Welcome back to Part 5 of the Legends of Young County and the death of Colonel A.T. Obenchain. In 1862, the roads of north central Texas were beaten down, muddy, almost invisible marks in the prairie grass, sometimes dug out by the ruts of wagon wheels and the hooves of horses, mules, and cattle. Some who were familiar with these conditions might know that the post oaks, briars, and cactus were evidence of nearby tanks and creeks. The trip from Fort Belknap to Camp Salmon near present-day Breckenridge was roughly 30 miles across this type of country. Obenchain, in the company of two rangers, had chosen to follow the prisoner's detail a day after it left, with a plan to stop at Camp Cooper before heading to Camp Colorado. Rex Stockson and Thude Watley were probably wondering why Obenchain chose them to escort him to Camp Salmon. They were both rangers under Cureton's command. It was almost a foregone conclusion that they would be sympathetic to Cureton over Obenchain, and yet they found themselves on the trail alone with the man threatening their captain. At Camp Colorado, Cureton stoically awaited his fate. The commander of the prison detail, Lieutenant William Peevler, was also concerned. He was Cureton's second in command, forced to march Cureton in shackles to be court-martialed. He couldn't have been looking forward to having his friend and superior officer tried and court-martialed, or having to answer to Obenchain afterwards. Compounding the problem, Obenchain was now 3 days overdue. Obenchain had reported he would follow the day after Peevler and the prisoner detail left, and yet 3 days later, he hadn't arrived. Speculation would be rampant. Indian attack? Enemies at Fort Belknap who might see this as an opportunity to get rid of Obenchain? Peevler finally sent a scouting party back along the trail to locate Obenchain, and they did find him. Colonel Alfred Thaddeus Obenchain was found lying just off the trail, alone, with a bullet hole in his back. Upon receiving the news, Peevler, Cureton, and the troops rushed back to Fort Belknap. A colonel in the Confederate Army, a commander of the fort closest to the Indian Territory, had been murdered. And where was his escort? Obenchain's body was collected and brought to Fort Belknap to be buried. An investigation was launched, and the two Texas Rangers, Stockson and Watley, were ordered to report. The Board of Inquiry listened closely as the two gave their testimony. The Rangers testified that shortly after leaving Fort Belknap, Obenchain began to ask questions regarding their testimony at Cureton's trial. Stockson and Watley refused to give details, telling Obenchain they would speak about the matter at the court-martial. Obenchain was furious. He demanded answers from the Rangers, fully expecting them to surrender to his authority and his ego. The Rangers then stated that as they traveled, Obenchain grew angrier and angrier, hurling insult after insult, then began to make threats if they continued to keep their testimony secret. He accused them of telling a pack of lies because they were friends of Cureton. Obenchain then threatened to have them put in chains and not allowed to testify. The Rangers reported that Obenchain threatened to kill them because he knew they would testify against him, and then Obenchain reached for his gun. Both Rangers also went for their guns in self-defense, but neither would take credit for the shot that hit Obenchain in the back, killing him. Obenchain fell dead from the saddle, his pistol at his side, and the Rangers fled the scene. The scouting party that located the body buried it, but he was later moved and reburied at the camp cemetery with no headstone to mark the location. With the complainant dead, the charges against Cureton were dismissed. At various times throughout the war, soldiers were sent to arrest Stockton and Watley, but the two were always warned of their approach. So disliked was Obenchain that not a resident of Belknap or the fort would give them up. Alfred Thaddeus Obenchain's death is little more than a footnote in the history of the Confederacy. With his death, the small town of Belknap returned to normal. Cureton would become sheriff of Bosque County and a master of at least one wagon train to California, and Lieutenant William Peebler would be killed by Comanche Indians near Cox Mountain in northeast Young County. Some say Colonel Obenchain still haunts the grounds of the fort, consumed with anger. At night when the wind whistles through the mesquite trees, some say Colonel Obenchain still haunts the grounds of the fort, consumed with anger. At night when the wind whistles through the mesquite trees, it almost sounds like moaning as it swirls around the barracks. And when the moon is partially veiled in clouds, some say they have seen him in the mist or early morning fog from the creeks in the Brazos River, silent and grim, seeking the rangers who took his life. Are the stories true? The only way to know is for you to investigate this for yourself, if you have the nerve to meet the vengeful spirit on a cold, windy night. Thank you for joining us for the Legends of Young County. There are more amazing stories waiting to be explored. Come see for yourself at the Young County Museum of History and Culture. I'm Scott, and we'll see you down the trail.